Good morning. This is the part 2 study of a family starter pack. Last week, we unpacked a little bit of that in Proverbs 21, and this week, we'll be going through Proverbs 22. Welcome to another episode of His Generation Podcast. You're listening to His Generation Podcast, a weekly exploration into biblical truth as we explore the Word of God. His Generation Podcast airs every Sunday morning, so grab your Bible, and here we go. Proverbs 22, verse 1. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, loving favor rather than silver and gold. Now, excellent reputation and a graciousness that is closely associated with it is what this verse is talking about. In this culture, it was a very important concept to grasp early on in life, a good name. There is a tightness within the community and a reliability on one another for survival. For instance, if a landowner wasn't diligent to harvest his crops, then he didn't have anything to bring to the market to sell. And if there was no food in the market, no food meant that the people didn't eat, etc., etc. So you get the understanding of having that good reputation within that community there. Well, in our society, this is not necessarily as a high priority. However, the ethic of it has not changed, especially on the basic family unit level. In fact, it's kind of saddening when you see children that have not been instructed that their decisions not only represent themselves, but they also represent the whole family unit. And not only does poor decisions cause grief to the parents, it brings shame quality to the family name. And that's what we need to understand. And also, you need to put that on the parents too, because when parents are careless and selfish in their actions without realizing the ripple effect it has on the entire family unit, you get really bad results, like a divorce. Once parents divorce, it affects the whole family unit. The kids, they are not raised with that both support system that is meant to be done in marriage under the same household. And thus, there's, consequences for that. And then also, too, for the man and the wife. Once they separate that marriage covenant, and I've taught this before in other Proverbs episodes, once they separate that marriage covenant, they will not fulfill the highest quality of them being a man and a woman in the society. So those things are really baked within how things are supposed to be on a natural order. And then lastly, just like having wisdom is better than riches, so too a good reputation. In other words, a good reputation is in the same ballpark as divine wisdom. Now think about that. Verse 6, train up a child in the way to go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Now, this is an interesting verse because in our Christian communities, much is said about this verse. But what I want to do is I want to be able to take this verse in the entirety of the understanding of the book of Proverbs and extract what we can say about this verse. So, first of all, it is not a promise. Proverbs are a poetry genre. And this type of style of writing, things cannot be strictly literal in meaning. For instance, when it says a lazy man will not get up because he sees a lion in the street, it's figurative. He doesn't really see a lion in the street. He's just exaggerating his laziness so he doesn't have to work. That's the idea behind being able to extract the truthfulness out of this, but you're looking at a figurative genre. So also, we would have to look at it as like a truthful observation of life that will most likely lead to a natural order of results. Second, in this verse, the phrase, the way, it's in the context of understanding the right path of following godly wisdom. So we need to see that also. And then thirdly, what does it mean to quote unquote train? Well, this is the same word that is used to describe how Solomon dedicated the house of the Lord in the sacrificial feast he held upon the temple's completion. And we see that in the Old Testament also. It means to instruct by giving a taste of what is to come through a sacrificial dedication. So it's almost like what we see in parenting in general. You know, parenting is a sacrifice of oneself for the child. And that's kind of that same thing when it says to train. So you got to think about this. If this is done by a godly parent to their children, what is going to be the result? And is it that way all the time? But again, like I said, that natural order of things, chances weigh heavy in favor of it. So in other words, when you raise a child in the way of the Lord, is it going to be 100% success? No, it won't be, because we're dealing with imperfect people. But at the same time, it's not a promise. But if you want the outcomes more likely, that's where the wisdom is. And that's what this verse is talking about. And one more thing I'd like to add to this. As we have learned, the book of Proverbs speaks deeply regarding God's economy. With that context in mind, I would also point out the idea of God creating individuals with a specific talent or a desirable and effective gift. And I would apply to this verse that idea too, because the right path will be the God-designed path for the child, which includes the gifting God has applied to the very structure of their DNA. So with parents, I would encourage them to seek that gifting of their child, develop it in them, teach them how to glorify God with it, and more than likely, once the child tastes the blessings of walking in their design function, they will have an experience of His goodness, and that's what will stick in their mindsets. Verse 7, the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is the servant to the lender. This verse for me is what helps drive the need to keep my family debt-free. It is a rich observation that holds a wealth of insight to financial planning. And those puns were intended, by the way. In marriage, financial strain is hard on the relationship. Let's just say that. Knowing this, you need to be careful how you spend, what you get credit for, the percentage on that credit. Also, too, what you can realistically afford, especially when it comes to luxury spending. It is shameful for a Christian who has been set free from worldly bondage to get into financial debt, by the way, which according to the wisdom is another form of slavery. Let's just say that. And it'd be an oppressive slavery also. Plus, again, it will tarnish your opportunity to earn that good name spoken about, as we saw there in verse 1. Verse 9, he who has a generous eye will be blessed, for he gives of his bread to the poor. And now this is a great verse to remember as far as a combination of what I just shared there in verse 7. And there's two things that I want you to remember of this verse. Number one, the blessing rebound does not necessarily mean material blessing. And number two, be mindful of who qualifies as poor before the generosity is handed out. And we've talked about that in past studies also. And I'd like to include this verse because giving is an essential part of managing a family. In my experience, for years, my family was financially challenged. Imagine raising two kids and supporting a wife while going to school full time and, having a monthly income of just enough to pay the rent and get some food. That's what my early life looked like. So what you see today, if there's any amount of success in my life, didn't happen overnight, because what you see is not because financial wealth, it was because of smart decisions and also just working hard. And it is an example of how I have learned to be generous over the years without just writing a check. especially when I did not have the money to do so. So I found other ways when I wasn't financially stable to pay through time and through effort and help and things like that. And that's what I would recommend, because I know there's people listening to this right now that, especially in this economy, that are strapped for cash. And if you're strapped for cash, doesn't mean you can't still be someone that's generous, especially when it comes to the local church and the local congregate members. There's ways of helping out with time and energy and your talents and things like that. It's not always just writing the check. Verse 14, the mouth of an immoral woman is a deep pit. He who is abhorred by the Lord will fall there. Or the recipients of the Lord's wrath fall into it. The word in this verse for immoral means an adulteress, a foreign enemy. That's the idea that's going on here. So when it's talking about an immoral person, it's not necessarily talking about just a prostitute, right? It's talking about someone that's going to pull you away from your community, from your family, from your spouse. That's the idea behind it. And now, why would I bring this into the topic of family management, or in this case, the family starter pack? For the young man looking for a woman to have marriage relationship, this is the verse that you need to understand. For the man dealing with temptation in marriage is a reality, folks. And so this is where you grab wisdom to go and to you understand like what your actions and what the temptation are all about. Another proverb states it this way: whoever commits adultery with a woman lacks understanding, and he who does so destroys his own soul. And that's Proverbs 6, verse 32. So here's your understanding. For a man to commit adultery, it's because that man, or in this case, that young man, never understood in the first place the reality, the stability, and the natural order of marriage. Because for a man to leave his spouse with the temptation of another woman, he throws away all that. It can never be repaired. Now, can the relationship be redeemed to where both parties don't break the covenant again? Yes. But as far as the natural order of things, there is no turning back. Irreversible damage. Now, that's the wisdom in it. And that's why you'll see verses like this, where the immoral woman, the person who commits adultery with her, is abhorred by the Lord. Or you'll see other verses where it says, God hates divorce. That's the understanding behind that. She is a deep pit, and she will bring down her victims. And a married man will never come back from the damage that this will do on not just himself, but his family, kids included. And that's what someone that commits adultery, that's why it says they lack understanding. So verses like this, teachings like this, other verses in the New Testament that speaks about marriage, those things are for the purpose to give the man the understanding as he is the head of the household. So I hope today's episode of His Generation was helpful for you. Join me next week when we'll be looking at the rest of Proverbs 22 with some new insights as we enter on the downslope of the whole book of Proverbs, eventually getting to Proverbs chapter 31. Thank you, and may you be blessed on this day, the Lord's Day.
Thank you for joining us at His Generation Podcast. To receive more information about the podcast, please visit our website, hisgeneration.net, or check out our YouTube channel, His Generation Podcast, for the video format of this broadcast. His Generation is a production of Generation Mars Media, located in Orange County, California.